Well, hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Jake Milstein, and I'm the host for today's discussion. We're going to have a discussion about the Colonial pipeline attack. Obviously, ransomware, obviously, all of that. Folks know what happened. So, what we'll do today is we'll have a quick catch up on the facts, and then we'll go to our panelists. A bunch of folks have sent in questions ahead of time for us to try to answer here, and we'll get to those questions. Over on the right hand side of the screen, you'll see a section that says chat. If you put in questions there, one, you can chat with each other, and two, we'll make sure to answer your questions here. But I'm curious. Let us know where in the world you all are. Go ahead and put your location in there, but not so specific. I mean, this is InfoSec, so I'm in Seattle. There you go, and welcome. So. We'll get started here in just 1 second. One thing to know is, so we all work at CI, and we provide managed detection response. We also provide consulting services like penetration tests and the like. This is not a sales webinar, don't worry. Even though I run marketing, that's as much as Mike and Fred and JLP let me do. And so we'll get to the discussion now. Mike Hamilton is CI Security co-founder, former CISO of Seattle. Fred Langston is also founded the company with Mike, and he's the EVP of Professional Services. And Jean-Luc Peck is one of our incident response experts, and works with a ton of our clients, including one just before this call, and has done a lot of responding, unfortunately, to ransomware incidents. So here's what happened. Colonial Pipeline carries 45% of the fuel to the East Coast. They were hit by ransomware on May 7th, and they shut down their operations. Gas supply impacted, resulting in panic buying. Colonial paid the ransom and is now coming back online. For those of you on the East Coast, you can probably tell us whether your gas stations have gas. I talked to my father yesterday, and he said that no, in fact, the gas station near him still doesn't have gas. The criminals, dark side ransomware as a service, and we'll get into ransomware as a service here in a minute. They extorted Colonial for $4.4 million. DarkSide says they're just criminals and they apologized, but of course they took the money. And DarkSide then said their servers were disrupted, the money's gone, and their crypto wallet emptied. Two news agencies, including CNN, reported that Colonial's billing system was impacted, and Colonial then shut down their pipeline. Colonial restored from backup anyway because the description was too slow. Colonial did not report to CISA, instead going to the FBI. And NERC and Congress are talking about regulations. So, guys, all of that happened. Let's just start with, what did Colonial do right? What did they do wrong? Mike, go ahead and start us off.
Okay, so what they did wrong was they did not raise their hand and talk to the agency in the United States that is tasked with protecting critical infrastructure, which they are. It's interesting that pipelines are actually, even though the thing is, an oil, gas pipeline carries energy, pipelines are actually part of the transportation sector. And so the sector-specific agency that adjudicates, regulatory oversight technically is the TSA. So take off your shoes. So anyway, they didn't call CISA, which is what they're supposed to do. And apparently they called the FBI, which is, that's an okay thing to do, but that makes it a law enforcement rather than infrastructure protection right off the bat. And it's not even clear that they did that right away until people started to howl about the fact that this is a gigantic energy artery of the United States. And what are you doing trying to clean this up yourself? It's time to bring in law enforcement, some people that, know what they're doing. So they didn't do that right. There have been other reports about how bad their security was. And there's actually somebody who was involved in assessing them, as Jean-Luc, I think, has a little more detail on this, but didn't say flattering things about their own security. So apparently they weren't handling information security, IT security, cybersecurity very well. They had been called out for it, and apparently that did not create any change. So those are the things they did wrong. What did they do right? I'm struggling with that one.
Well, I mean, they had backups, and this question has just come up in the chat here. So they said, yeah, we have backups. We can restore from the backups, but we're going to pay the ransom anyway. Fred, what's up with that?
Well, so this is a lack of foresight and something people learn the hard way, in that a lot of the encryption algorithms and the way that they decrypt things take forever. If you can have read some of the latest, now they're double encrypting some ransomware payloads. That's going to double the length of time it takes to unencrypt that stuff and bring it back online, which I think may be self-defeating for the bad guys, because if it becomes cheaper just to restore from backup in all instances, you put yourself out of business. So I think there's a lesson to be learned here, that, you know, the best solution, I think, someday will be to rapidly restore from backup and get away from paying ransom, completely just cut off that ability. You know your data's stolen. Yeah, they're going to put it out on the dark web. If you think you're going to pay them and they're not going to resell it to somebody else down the line, you're fooling yourself. You're not really protecting it from being stolen on the dark web. You're just delaying it, right? You're delaying it hopefully to maybe you've moved on to another position and the blowback hits somebody else. So, you know, there's a lot of tough decisions they faced. I think actually what they did right was looking at it. I mean, it wasn't right to pay the ransom, I don't think, and I think they probably realize that now. But I think it was right to say, you know what, let's just go from restore from full backup, because we're much surer that way that we're going to end up with our data back, because a lot of ransomware decryption algorithms don't work, or only partially give you your data back because they fail. I mean, this is not, you know, software that's been through 3 rounds of regression testing. You know, it's something a guy did on, you know, at the middle of the night.
And you know, and JLP and Mike, so people are asking, do we know how the ransomware got in? I saw one person who said, you know, probably phishing. That's how DarkSide does most of its stuff. But do we know?
Yeah. Hamilton, you're muted there.
Or I think he's
no, I'm not. I'm just talking, moving my lips and not saying anything. I never talk on mute. Go ahead, John Luke.
I think the likelihood is that it came in through one of the traditional methods, but I've not seen any reporting which says we can confirm this. I've seen a couple of unconfirmed sources which say it was like an email phish which went into an accounting department, but again, I'm not taking that to the bank here.
Well, I think it's important. Well, it's interesting to point out that a lot of people are saying DarkSide is actually REvil, which is, you know, we've been dealing, John Luke has been, you know, doing battle with REvil for about over a year solid now. Yeah. And it was GanCrab before that. So this is part of also, I think, the obfuscation of, hey, we're going to go away, we're going to disappear. Well, they've already done that 3 times. They were GanCrab, now they're REvil, now they're DarkSide. There'll be something else next week. Yeah. It's just a way of taking the big target that you painted on for every intelligence agency off your back and moving on to, you know, a fresh start, right? So, and what I think, if you want to think of the tradecraft that, you know, REvil use, it's, you know, they use Soda and Akibi. You know, they basically send something over email, somebody clicks on it, and it's off and running. So if we want to speculate, which is really all we have right now, we kind of hoped that us giving ourselves a couple of days instead of jumping in last Friday on this, there'd be more information for us to chew on. But we're still doing a lot of speculation. So we have to use what little intelligence we have to make these kind of assumptions.
True, but there's a why here, right? And so as I think about this, here's the why. So this oil and gas sector is adjacent to the energy sector. If you do anything around energy generation, so if you run a dam or a coal-fired plant, whatever you do, and you're making electricity to add to the grid, you're regulated by NERC, right? The NERC CIPs, the Critical Infrastructure Protection Standards. Oil and gas is not. And they don't have NERC and FERC standing on their neck. They have the TSA making them take off their shoes. So that's a gap. And because this oil and gas sector is not regulated for our kind of security, and B, they don't serve consumers. So there's no consumer expectations as to, how things are going to be handled internally, and there's no blowback from their, their customer base like there is if you're a retailer or something like that. So because they fall through these cracks, they're not regulated, they don't have consumer pressure, they may have shareholder pressure, but remember, this privately run company, they actually don't even have shareholders. So because they've fallen through all these cracks, and they're not the only ones like this, that's why they're on NERC's radar right now. Okay, you do move energy. You don't generate energy, but you move. You are the supply chain for the energy sector. That's why this happened. They're allowed to be lax because they don't have anybody holding them to any standard. Now on the one hand, what's going to happen here is NERC is going to get into the game, and they're going to give them a bunch of regulatory requirements to meet. So we're going to start the same process over again. Okay, we're going to make recommendations for standards, and here's your standard of practice and all of this stuff, doing the same thing over and over, and it really doesn't move the needle. So, maybe we can talk later in this chat about what public policy can help this.
Well, I think so. We've hit 3 topics in there. We've talked about the public policy and what needs to change. We've talked about the rebranding of DarkSide and what that becomes and what's really going on with the ransom and the crypto wallet and all of that. And we'll get back to those things. And I want to get there, but I want to go to something that's going on in the chat here, which is people have keyed in on was really the thing that was shut down or attacked the business. Did they just shut it down because they couldn't bill? One of the things that they have said is, it impacted a lot of business systems. And we didn't want it to spread. And so we shut it down. What do you think?
I'll jump in and I'll say a bunch of things here. One, there's the question of, if you're looking at anything that should be thought of as critical infrastructure, there should be a complete separation between the business side operations and the operational technology. In NERC SIP, it's electronic security perimeter. And you have a data diode, which is a type of network that only allows data to go one way and it can't get in. If that were in place, then their OT infrastructure hopefully would have been protected. What we're hearing is it was purely the business infrastructure. But what that also says is that they couldn't have jumped over that barrier and actually affected the pipeline itself if they're following good, strong procedures. But the other component to this is it connected in a way that if I have a problem with the billing system, that it literally will not allow the pipeline to operate? And that is
the question.
That is the question. That's a possibility, that these are so tightly integrated that would not be, you could not have the pipeline flow without the billing system. But then again, that goes head to head with what you'd expect with a hard separation between these environments, or at least a data diode in between those environments that only allows data from the OT to move to IT. So there's a whole bunch of questions here. And I think what everybody wants to get to is it ethical to stop a critical infrastructure, for a billing issue? And I will have to lean back and say there might have been a conscious decision to go to the FBI instead of CISA, because CISA, who's responsible for critical infrastructure, would have said, you're going to keep that flowing. I don't care if you can't bill. We'll find a way to compensate you on the back end. So again, there's so many loose ends and so many what ifs that we're still haven't got answers for. And everybody's waiting for that answer. I mean, that's the ethical question here. Did they make an ethical business decision? Or was this something that was purely a business decision? And frankly, the consumers in 10, 12 states have really had hardship put in front of them. And certainly people lost money, right?
They caused a lot of their own problems too. Okay, let's be clear.
I mean, so, but so John Luke, you help a lot of organizations that are trying to prepare for the inevitable ransomware attack at some point, and I think some of them will come to you at this point and say, okay, if it is true that Colonial's business system was hit, but they decided to shut everything down, what they're saying is they were afraid the ransomware would spread. What What advice do you give organizations based on that?
So first up, I want to say that threat I think is absolutely valid. I think their statement of we have a group of computers over here, they've been compromised, we're going to proactively shut down other operations in order to make sure they don't get hit as well. That's absolutely a viable response tactic. It's something that we recommend quite regularly in ransomware scenarios. So I don't take issue with that. I think it comes down to Fred's question, which is essentially the ethics of it. And again, do you shut down operations of something simply because of the business side of it? If you aren't able to bill back for the services you're providing, do you shut down providing those services? Now, if you're just a simple private entity, that's a particular question, and there's going to be follow-on effects, mostly centered around your income and your profit stream. If your public infrastructure, by which I mean not that they are publicly owned, but that they are providing infrastructure to a significant portion of the public, like we saw with this, those questions are very different. The answers to those questions have to be different. There was a question which flew up in chat a little while ago about separating OT from the rest of the environment, OT being operational technology. And in this case, it would be the devices, the sensors, the pumps, the controllers, the stuff that's actually powering the pipeline, where you've got business systems off to the other side, which are doing things like keeping, corporate side up and running, accounting and payable and everything else that happens within the business. I think there is a world or a scenario in which they could have opted to keep the pipeline up and running, keep the OT active while they addressed the threat on the corporate side. The problem is it requires an extensive amount of pre-planning, a lot of technical configuration work, and then a lot of ongoing testing and validation, because you've essentially got to create two separate networks there with very specific bridges and overlaps in between. Clearly, like they're describing, you can't get billing data from a system which is completely air-gapped away. So if you've got a computer over here which needs to send out bills to customers and it's doing so based on meters coming from over here, they've got to have a way to talk to each other. You've got to get that information into the billing system in a way which does not involve somebody sitting there reading from one screen and hand typing into the other. So that's where you get into a lot of the security recommendations, the technology controls that should be in place. To Mike's point, the NERC SIP requirements, should those have been applied to this particular event, I think there's a lot of merit there. It is a huge question, and I think it's ultimately going to come down to, what do we need as far as public infrastructure? Again, public in the sense that it's providing a service to the public. And then what requirements are we going to need to have in order to make sure that they can maintain continuity of operations in the face of something like this, so that we don't have an organization who says, I'm not going to be able to send out bills next month. I'm just going to stop providing water or power or gas, as we've seen here. There's an interesting footnote I want to bring up, and then I'll hand it back. There was an article which came out, I think it's today, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, saying that their internal, the Colonial Pipeline's internal nomination system. My understanding of the nomination process is this is when somebody says, I've got X bajillion gallons of oil and I want to feed it down your pipeline. So this is essentially the ordering system here. Their nomination system has been offline in part because of the hardening efforts due to the recovery efforts. So they've been applying security recommendations to this server, which then caused problems with their pipeline. But there's an interesting note in their statement, and that is that the Colonial pipeline system continues to deliver refined products as nominated by our shippers. So what they're saying there is the nomination system's gone down, the pipeline's still flowing. Now, I don't know exactly what to make out of that, but it does tell me that there is at least a scenario where they didn't necessarily need to shut down here recently.
Yeah, they got a stern talking to for sure about you are not going to shut down the flow if your email system crashes.
Well,
So
so,
I-
but hang on. So, one of the things you said that JLP was that, talking about their security, and their maturity, maybe their maturity wasn't where it should be. There is a guy who said that he did an assessment, and what he said was, an eighth grader could hack in, right? I know you have feelings about that as somebody who does assessments, but
Yeah, so I'll say first and foremost, I don't agree with or respect that guy's actions. When we do an assessment or we do work for a company, we take the confidentiality of that work and that client and their information and the state of their network very seriously. For anybody to be saying, I was a security assessor for this organization, which you're reading about because they are offline at the moment. I can tell you, I went in a couple years ago and they were as secure as a spaghetti colander, and they ignored all the recommendations and they paid me $50,000 for this report, which they then ignored. Uh, I can't get on board with that at all.
Yeah, that's the ethics. That's the ethics of our business.
Yeah. So I have challenges with that. That said, I do think that there absolutely should be, and I think there is right now, but it's a little bit more informal. There should be an escalation path for assessors, security professionals, organizations like the FBI, JTTF, DHS, anybody to say, we've got critical infrastructure, we've got private operators, we've got security assessments showing that there are weak points, that there are risks. If this entity goes offline for X number of days, there's going to be this kind of fallout. These are the sorts of assessments which healthcare organizations have to do regularly, if not just actually annually, because they've got to know that if their environment goes down, if they lose power for a week, a month, whatever, or there's some natural disaster, they may be the regional coordination center. They may be the regional disaster trauma site for where everybody's bringing their injured and their wounded. And I have a hard time calling a single hospital more of a critical infrastructure asset than a pipeline, which is supplying half, 2/3 of the eastern seaboard with its ongoing fuel. So I think this has highlighted a big gap in the way that the U.S. has been looking at certain areas of the major infrastructure, which we're all relying on every day without even knowing it.
Yeah, I think it's a huge point that we have clear open gaps in our critical infrastructure. We kind of have to look around and say, how did that happen? You would think something of this nature would clearly have been covered and would have some level of regulation on top of it. And I did want to bring up, and this is worth talking about, as you alluded to with the nomination system. This is what's known as a fungible resource, meaning anybody at the head end can shove in oil or fuel into that pipeline, and as they shove in this end, and it gets pumped out the end 2,000 miles away, they get paid on what comes out the other end as if it's the same thing they put in at the other end, meaning it's truly a real-time system. And it's not like we're just measuring the amount of something and then we're going to bill you in a month. They're literally getting paid as you shove in one end, as it comes out the other end, you're getting the money comes. That's what a fungible resource system like this is. And it is a somewhat unique economic model, but this still goes back to, we know this. We should have looked into the contingencies to handle a situation like this. This is a lack of imagination, if you will, on something that's not that strange. In fact, this was just a basic, what we think is a relatively standard ransomware gang. Certainly, the Russian government is probably telling them, to do
let's
this,
talk about that.
Yeah, that's the next topic. But we're not talking about, it doesn't look like nation state work, right? It looks like
it doesn't. What it looks like is a cutout. Okay, because let's be clear. Dark side ransomware as a service means there was a customer. Who's the customer? And is that part of the investigation? It seems to me that if I had been, one of the dark side operators, I'd want to throw somebody under the bus real quick. And there's nobody being thrown under the bus. So that's either honor among thieves, or they're afraid to disclose who that may have been. And frankly, it is in the strategic interests of the Russian government to poke us in the infrastructure. And as far as I'm concerned, this looks like a cutout was used, which provides plausible deniability behind criminals to test to see what our reaction would be here. And if our reaction is not severe enough, it's going to happen again.
Yeah.
Well, so as Fred mentioned earlier, this is not the first ransomware as a service gang. Revil was before, and there are others out there. It's not always a nation state that's the buyer. Are the ransomware as a service, are they different than non-ransomware as a service? I mean, other than somebody operating their own?
Yeah, the business model is different. Yeah.
Business model, exactly. Different business model. That's all.
Yeah. Right? And what they're trying to do is franchise themselves, basically. But ask yourself this, right? If these operators are within the bounds of Russia, right? And there's lots of reasons to think this, right? Like, if you read Brian Krebs' site this morning, he's going, hey, you don't want these guys to harangue you. Introduce your computer to the Russian keyboard set. And when the check comes and they say, oh, it's got Russian keyboard on here, they go away. Okay. That doesn't mean they come from Russia, but it strongly suggests that they do. And, if these are, gangs are operating within Russia, don't you think the GRU knows exactly who they are, what they do? I mean, it's been reported that they even trade tools. So come on. It is not likely that the Russian government had no idea what was going down here. And it is likely that they had a hand in making this happen, again, to test, to see what our reaction was going to be. Are we going to treat this like a bunch of criminals? We're trying to rip off some more money. Okay, we made them go away. Or are we going to buck up? Are we going to have some public policy that actually treats this what it is, right? The critical sectors were created to prevent terrorism, okay? And so technically, if you go disrupt intentionally one of these hospitals, what's going on in the hospitals, same thing. You're a damn terrorist. And if we don't start treating it that way, we don't change the lexicon and the rhetoric around this and let them know this is how we're going to start treating this, it's going to continue to happen.
And we're going to get to the public policy in a second. I have one more question here, which is, okay, so DarkSide said, we're sorry, we didn't mean to do this, we're not going to do any others. This is not the first time we've heard about the ethical ransomware gang, right? At the beginning of the pandemic, somebody said, oh, sorry, we're not going to attack any hospitals. And then a bunch of hospitals got attacked. When you guys see this idea of, criminals being, I don't know, having a heart, what do you think? John Luke, what do you think?
I think over the last few years, we've seen a couple of ransomware groups which formed up, and they said, this is going to be our code of conduct. These are our ethics, which we're going to be operating under. I think if we continue with that evolution, then the next formation of DarkSide or Revil or whoever they may be, they're probably going to have a board of regents who are going to require approval before you actually launch an attack or before anything gets held hostage. I don't think it's bad. I think it's an interesting twist, but I think it's because we are dealing with a global playground, for lack of a better word, with various laws across various regions. And so, if you attack an entity in the United States, you're going to expect a certain level of response. If you would attack an entity in Croatia or Somalia, you're going to expect a different kind of response. One of those may have infinitely higher number of guys with guns coming to you, and they may not be friendly. So I think there's a big threat model which comes into play here for these organizations who are deciding what to do. And I think as we get larger organizations and more of these organized crime conglomerate type entities, we're going to start seeing more and more turf wars. I think this is the 21st century version of the drug wars over the last 30, 50 years or so. And it's going to be fascinating socially to watch how this develops. But ultimately, it's going to come down to what are the responses? Is it going to be more trouble than it's worth? Is it going to cost us more in the long term to go after these kinds of organizations? The fact that DarkSide so quickly put up on their webpage, like you said, this wasn't us. We didn't mean to do this. We don't
Sorry
go
about
after.
that.
Hey, we're
Yeah,
criminals, man. Wasn't us.
yeah. Ordinary, decent criminals is what it comes down to. So I think it's going to be interesting to watch, but there's going to be a lot of changes coming up here.
I call blue shoes on the fact that DarkSide didn't know exactly what they're doing. They had a $5 million ransom. They knew exactly who they were after.
And that's not where they started with the ransom request. Sure.
So, I mean, don't anybody that claims they didn't know exactly what the impact of what this would be is fooling themselves. Or they wouldn't have asked for that gigantic ransom right out of the gate, which, as Mike said, was probably 20 million when it started. So, I call blue shoes completely on that.
You can curse on this platform. It's not we're not on LinkedIn or Facebook or anything.
Yeah,
it's okay.
We just shouldn't. We can do it. We do it in the green room. That's okay.
Yeah, that opens a dark door.
Yeah, all right. Maybe not. We shouldn't. Maybe Fred can, but you two can't. All right, Mike, what were you going to say?
I have no idea.
Okay. So then let's get to the there are a bunch of questions in the chat here about paying ransom. One, should companies be allowed to pay the ransom? Two, should they be allowed to pay it in crypto and be and that's come up a lot. Somebody, Mark says, I thought they said paying in crypto could be prosecuted as money laundering. Is this not a perfect case for that? Fred?
Yeah. Okay. So let's start at the beginning, as they say. And what precipitated this ransomware epidemic that we have? The advent of cryptocurrency. Okay. The fact that we have unregulated cryptocurrency has created an ability to launder money, to conduct criminal activities, and get ransoms unencumbered by legal threats at all. Boy, we know how to step in it as a society, don't we? So once we've enabled this methodology, we put ourselves in this position, right? This will not go away, cannot go away until we remove this ability to pay ransom without any consequences. So that's the first problem. The second problem is any paying of this, if we take away the profit incentive, right, and we build a way for people to recover. Mike, I want you to talk about the idea you had. I don't want to steal your thunder on that. That's a great idea. But, we have to make it easier for people to take another path than paying a ransom. And I don't necessarily think the threat of you're laundering money, which you are. I mean, come on, you are. But I don't know that we want to start prosecuting businesses that are just trying to save themselves, right? So it's a conundrum, and I think it takes a different type of approach than we're going to have better walls and defenses. We're going to buy insurance and we're going to pay our way out of this.
Mm-hmm.
This is all losing strategy. This can't work. Okay, in the long run.
Yeah, I agree, and they've designated some Bitcoin wallets. So there's existing laws that say you can't support things in countries that we have on a bad list. And so what they've done is they've equated some of these cryptocurrency wallet addresses to countries where these operators are, and say that's off limits. And if you actually pay a ransom to that crypto wallet, you are going to be prosecuted for that.
Yeah, but
I agree
really
with Fred that is not the best way to do it. That will not be effective. But the Secretary of Homeland Security has, and I'm just reading between the lines here, but this does sound like a good idea, has proposed I think it was a $25 million response and recovery fund. Okay, so if we did the following things together, yes, the standards of practice are going to come. They will probably be audited by, the federal government, much in the way that HHS does hospital, FERC does, power generation, et cetera, et cetera. I doubt if the TSA will be the auditors, but they need those standards, right? Second thing is we need a no ransom policy, but it's got to be coupled with, we will assist you. We will take up the slack in getting you recovered. And so if the US has got this, response and recovery fund, and that's what it's for, and I don't know that that's what it's for, but that sure sounds like a good idea, that allows us to prohibit this paying of these ransoms because we've got this fail-safe mechanism to back you up. And I think that is a good strategy. And the other strategy, as I've said before, is public hangings.
Well, so insurance, one of the things that has come up, and Jim just mentioned this in chat, is insurance, right? Companies have gotten insurance, and sometimes the insurance company wants you to pay the ransom instead of restoring because
we
it's
should
cheaper
break
to
that
do
model. We should break that model. Yes, we should, because the insurance companies are in there doing a calculation and say, are we going to get out of this cheaper by restoring from backup, or we get out cheaper by paying the ransom? And because it's only a business decision, that cannot continue. So we have to disable that whole, business model.
Yeah, I'll jump in because there's some stuff flying by in chat here. I think the idea of paying the ransom is such a misnomer because you're not making your incident go away. Throwing money at this and getting the software, or rather just giving the criminals the money that they're asking for, does not suddenly mean you have not had attackers in your network, does not suddenly mean you don't have additional ransomware or other crypto tools floating around on every one of your computers. And more importantly, it does not mean you have not had a data breach.
No, and so Matthew says, what about companies like FireEye and CI? Don't they have disaster response programs that companies pay for, 24/7 service? Fred?
And there's lots of companies that don't. And so what do we do for them?
Yeah. So
right?
First off, the last way, we say this every day now, the last way we want to meet you is when you call us in the middle of the night when you've had ransomware. Okay, don't introduce yourself to us that way. I don't want to meet you that way. Okay, let's get ahead of this first. Yes, we have the ability, but do you know what 99% of our ultimate disposition is you're going to be rebuilding stuff from backup, or sometimes even from scratch. I mean, I can tell you on my both hands the number of times we've been able to really help people out of it without some major response. I mean, once they're in there and they're bulldozing through your environment, I mean, it's at that point, it becomes, let's just nuke it from orbit and let's be sure, right? Let's be sure. Right?
And so now I want to get to public policy here because there's a bunch in the chat earlier. Somebody saying we're going to trust Congress to make policy here because all of their passwords are P at SSWRD. Are we really going to trust them? But right now, NERC wants to get involved. There are two House bills. One of them is even called like the Pipeline Security Act or something like that. Like, Mike, what's
that's the knee-jerk response to this stuff, right? It's always, we just got to give them standards of practice, right? I mean, we're doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome, right? This is management by landmine. And if you don't cutting off the money flow is the way to get that business to fail, right? The ransomware business, you have to make it fail. And cutting off the money is one way, but introducing terror into the hearts of the people that are behind it and equating them with their government, because the two cannot be dissociated, and starting to treat them like, remember after September 11th, we had this great thing called extraordinary rendition, right? We go snatch terrorists and they end up in Gitmo. That needs to happen maybe twice, and ransomware goes off a cliff, betcha. So when I say public policy, I mean putting some teeth around this and starting to equate this thing. Here are these governments that support these operations either tacitly or openly, and like I said, there's reports that they share tools. If that's what this is going to be, then that's how we have to treat it, right? If your government is enjoying all of the proceeds, the $600 billion a year that are exfiltrated from the United States because of this crime, and you look the other way or you actively support this, that is not criminal activity anymore. And we got to start treating it like that. And I'm telling you, a couple of public hangings makes everything different.
So somebody asked what you meant by public hangings. What do you mean, Mike? What do you want to see happen there?
Snatch a couple of people, send them to Gitmo, and torture them. That's what I mean. That's
That's
exactly what I mean.
That's not necessarily public. Fred, forget the
Everybody
hanging
will
thing
hear
for-
about it.
Yeah.
Fred, thoughts on public policy here?
The one thing I don't necessarily want to see is let's create new standards, a whole new set of laws, and a whole new set of legislation that's going to deal with this. I mean, we have got so many good standards. Having copy pasta yet another standard, and I read it and I go, man, this looks just like what I've been reading for 20 solid years. Hadn't changed one iota, same stuff. Come on, that is not helping. Okay, it's time to start being more inclusive in who needs to adhere to the standards we have today. Okay, let's throw another whole set of stuff at this whole vertical here. Come on, that's not the way to do this, right? We just need to be a lot more inclusive and start saying if you have a component of your business that is critical to critical infrastructure, you need to be secure and you need to adhere to like this CSF, or probably maybe even something slightly more rigorous if we're talking about, but at least in this CSF, right?
With personal accountability for the decision makers of the organization.
That's right. That's
like-
right. You want to get an
just like-
executive's attention, you say gross negligence.
Exactly. Yep. For all the changes that we saw, rather the change in attitudes that we saw coming after the Target and Home Depot breaches, I think the same needs to happen in the public infrastructure world.
And so David says, Guantanamo didn't stop terrorism. Why will do anything here, Mike?
Well, it moved the needle. I would say it moved the needle. And, you can say it didn't stop terrorism. Tell me, did it give pause to a lot of terrorists who otherwise would have tried to blow things up here? Because I bet it did. And, frankly, all of these people that are operating with impunity, as soon as they figure out that they don't have impunity, they rethink. They are going to rethink.
So people have also emailed in questions, and I want to get this one in. And this one is about public infrastructure. I had a question. I was interested in seeing your view on whether there is any difference in our preparedness for this oil pipeline attack compared to something like Florida's water plant attack a couple of months ago, and that one was in Tampa. And I don't know that we ever figured out who did that one, but they did adjust the levels in the water supply and made it dangerous. But I think the question here is, these are all things we count on. So, aren't they the same, and shouldn't we be treating them the same, Mike?
Well, so first of all, it's you're comparing apples and golf clubs. The water sector. So in the ecosystem that is Homeland Security's critical infrastructure protection, there are critical sectors, and every critical sector has a government coordinating council, a sector coordinating council, a sector-specific agency, and an ISAC, Information Sharing and Analysis Center. The sector-specific agency for the water sector is the EPA, and historically, the EPA has only regulated water purity, water quality. Now, because they're that sector-specific agency, they can start, and they're seeing these things happen. Now they're requiring self-assessments against the NIST CSF. This is going to end up being audited later on. The Coast Guard, the sector-specific agency for maritime ports, started to do the same thing. The TSA will now start doing the same thing for the pipelines that are under their purview. All those things are about to happen. Is that going to change anything? No. To Fred's point, this is doing the same. This is the spin cycle, right? Okay, apparently we need to regulate. Yes, they need standards of practice, but if we don't couple this with public policy, it's not going to go anywhere. Now, the water sector, that was a criminal of opportunity, okay? That was a doofus that somehow found out that there was this exposure, TeamViewer or whatever it was, fiddled around, found out I had no credentials, easily guessed passwords, something like that, logged in, screwed around. Uh-oh, don't know what I'm doing, got to get out of here. That's how that went down. No extortion, not nation state, not malicious, nothing like that. So it's hard to compare the two, but the comparison as to what's going to happen in terms of regulatory oversight, there's an analogy there with the water sector, right? But again, it's management by landmine. Nothing was done to get in front of the problem. Something blows up. It's like, oh, we got to do something about that. Well, let's let's give them some standards of practice to meet.
And Fred, another question that came in: as a provider of software solutions to Colonial or customers like them, what type of precautions should we be on the lookout for when engaging, deploying, or operating our code in their environments?
So I would say if you're selling your code to them, I don't think there's any threat. Only if you're acting as providing maintenance on that software code base or applications, then you need to worry the same exact thing that was the entry point for the Florida water thing is the remote access, right? They were allowing remote access into the environment. They had not secured that remote access properly. Well, you will have the identical issue if you're allowing somebody to manage their software on your network. Identical, right? They're probably using VPN, they're using ConnectWise, TeamViewer, whatever the flavor of the week is. And if you're not managing that and securing that connection, right off the bat, you're behind the eight ball. And if you're not managing that vendor and saying contractually you need to do these things, like you have to have antivirus, you have to have your Windows firewall up when you're connected to our environment. You can't ever bring a USB stick that you're using on some other client or some other place and plug it into our network, right? All these things should be called out for vendors. But if you're talking about a software model, it's probably remote maintenance that's the biggest threat.
And John-Luc, I know you're engaged here in the chat with some folks here. Michael says this is a big discussion. The Texas natural gas equipment not winterized after 10 years, knowing it's vulnerable. This is a corporate responsibility. We get into this place here over, what's government overreach, what's not government overreach. What do you? First of all, your answer in the chat there. Excellent parallel. So can you talk about that parallel a little bit, and then let's talk about what's government overreach, what's not, what's the right thing here?
Yeah. So if you're not following the conversation there, Michael brought up this parallel about what happened in Texas during the last big natural storm, where you had tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people who were completely without power, completely without gas, massively dropping temperatures, sub-zero kind of conditions, and people had no way to heat their homes. And then arguably worse, although it's difficult to define that, then they got a bill that was massively jacked up because there was no regulation of the rates. So I think the parallel example there that we're talking about, essentially private organizations, private companies, which are providing this necessary service. In the Colonial case, it's fuel through the pipeline, but it's a private corporation who's making the risk management decisions there. I think there's a very, very serious question which has to be asked, which is, should that be left up to the corporations? And I don't care whether you're a power or a natural gas provider in Texas, or a pipeline operator, or a water plant in a district of 100,000 people. I think there's rules and regulations you have to be operating under. There's a very big difference between a chocolate bar factory deciding, I'm not going to winterize my production line. Okay, they stop making chocolate bars for a day, a week, a month, whatever. That's going to be a hit to their profit. That's going to be a hit to people's employment. Yes, absolutely. But nobody's going to die because they're not getting chocolate bars that week. Nobody's going to die because the sudden cessation of chocolate flow to their house has meant they don't have power or heat or gas to be able to get around town. And so I think, to Michael's point here about an organization knowingly endangering clients, that raises points at which you have to decide. And I think you, as in the US as a whole here, has to decide who should be setting these risks, who should be deciding what is and is not tolerable or acceptable risk here. And one of the challenges that we've got as a country and as a governance structure is that you've got the federal regulations, and you've got the state regulations, you've oftentimes got regional regulations that you've got to work within as well. Those three alone oftentimes don't agree 100%. Then oftentimes you've also got private corporate regulations or private corporate policies, which, like we're talking about, these private corporations are following, and they're essentially then stuck by their own rule books so that they can point to a policy and say, I can't invest $10 million worth of security here because the policy just won't allow for it. Well, but who wrote the policy? Who set the policy? Who determined what the annual priorities were going to be that year? And it just keeps pointing right back up to the boardroom of these organizations. So I think, to the point we had earlier, which is where when you start seeing public accountability, if, for example, the Colonial pipeline operators were dragged before Congress for a very public, say, 10-hour hearing session where they were asked
A
some very
whipping.
deep program. Yeah, exactly. And I think absolutely the same needs to happen of the Texas electrical and energy operators, but that wasn't a cyber attack, so I'm holding back my judgment there.
The problem there is the government of Texas took this risk
Knowingly.
knowingly,
Yeah.
right? So I mean, there's
And
no one to blame
accepting
here.
risk is a
They
perfectly
said
good way to
this
deal
is
with
our
risk.
decision. We're taking this risk. They said that. So I mean, the problem here is people in Wisconsin paid the same rates for power in Texas because of the connection between the systems, and they had no voting power to ever say how that would happen. And that's a problem when a particular regional government, state government, makes a decision that affects other entities, nationwide. This is where the federal government's got to. I mean, nobody wants more regulation, but somebody's got to set the basic ground rules here.
Yeah, and this conversation brings up this interesting tension that's always existed, right? Should security be best handled by regulation or by market forces, right? And so, hey, we're capitalists, right? As market forces, we screw up, our customers leave, we go out of business. That's market forces, right? But when we're talking about commodities like this that have to do with, our own ability to exist and, to continue to grow and things like that, I actually think we could turn this on its head a little bit. And I'm just riffing here. Let's say that instead of regulating all of your controls, and the NERC SIPs are frankly pretty prescriptive. The NIST CSF is like not prescriptive at all, right? Just whatever you got to do to meet this outcome. But instead of giving you these requirements to meet, we give you an SLA. That oil's got to come out of that pipeline. And all the stuff you got to do upstream to make sure that keeps happening, that one thing, what comes out of the end of that thing is how you will be judged, right? Or incentivized or fined in some cases or whatever. But instead of saying you got to do all these things to make yourself secure, it's you got to keep the oil flowing. And if your security is part of that, then you better get after it, because the fine for stopping the flow is going to be huge, right? Like a NERC SIP violation can be $1 million a day. That's going to get attention. So that might be an interesting way to do it. And in terms of SLAs, and there's an opportunity coming up, because remember, it's infrastructure week, right? So I mean, to the extent that we are going to make a big investment in infrastructure, it's already been raised that, hey, you're not talking about, the security that needs to go around this stuff. And we don't want to bolt it on at the end like we always do. So there is an opportunity to do this right now. And I think this event may be a forcing function in doing it better.
I hope so. All right, couple pieces of housekeeping here. We're not done. There's another question from Mark in the chat we're going to get to. We're going to do final thoughts. But I do, for folks who need to split, I want to put a survey link in the chat. We give you the survey for a couple of things. Number one, how are we doing? We want to know, was this helpful? Do you like these? Should we keep doing these? We've done these urgent panel discussions for a couple of things now. We want your opinions. Second is, at the end of it, you get a gift card for yourself, or you can donate to a food bank, something we started doing when the pandemic started. And third is, because of things like this, one of the things, we're a mission, based organization, and we want everybody to have great security and at least know where they are in their security journey. We've started doing 13-point assessments for anyone who wants them without cost. It's a 60-minute discussion of sort of where are you. If you want a 13-point assessment, when you take the survey, there's a place where you can say, yeah, contact me, and let's set up that 60 minutes. John asked a question, can I get a recording? Because you were on a support call. Awesome. Yes, if you registered for this, you will get a recording automatically from the system. And if you don't, you can just email me and I will get you whatever you need. Also, if you don't want to click a link because you work in InfoSec, you can also email me because, I don't know, somehow email is safer than clicking a link. That's probably true, right, Mike?
That's true.
All right,
marketing malware, man. I never touch that stuff.
All right. I want to get to Mark's question here, which is, what about technology improvements as a preventative measure, such as being able to restore quickly from backup and thorough cleansing of the ransomware? That's like, instead of laws against guns, we don't get shot, then instead wear a protective vest. Fred.
So the problem with the cleaning issue is, unless you have your logging utilities and your data sources fully configured and turned up, in many cases as high as possible, you're not going to have enough data to be able to go and effectively say, here are all the systems that the bad guy is on, and here's the ones I need to clean, and here's exactly what I need to clean out of them. That is an almost, in many cases, if you have many machines, it's an insurmountable task, at least the time it takes. So in that instance, it becomes vastly cheaper and ultimately safer just to recover and restore from backup. So that's one of the reasons it's usually vastly more expensive to go and find what they may have done. And there's always the chance that you can miss something. You can't disprove a negative kind of thing. I can't say for sure that you're not in there unless I keep looking ad infinitum forever, because you always could be hiding around that next rock. I just didn't turn over that next rock. So this is the real painful part of IR. John Luke has to give this message all the time to people where, look, you're at the point with what we have to deal with, it's better to rebuild.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to put up everybody's email addresses in case you want to get in touch with us while we do final thoughts here. Final thoughts. JLP, you start.
This is, I hope, going to have big downstream consequences that are going to change the way that we approach some infrastructure, which I think has slipped through the cracks here. I don't think more regulation in the sense of we need more frameworks, we need a pipeline-specific cybersecurity act. I don't think that's necessary. I think that's barking up the wrong tree. I think what we do need right now, Lance has been bringing this up in chat, and I agree 150%. I think what we need is consistent application of the current standards that are out there. And more than that, we need severe enforcement, especially for the leadership who are deciding not to apply the recommendations or to just accept the risks.
Fred.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear we need to start treating this, I think, as Mike alludes to, as terrorism. And we need to escalate this to something that's not just a business thing, right? This is it was a regional disaster, period. End of story. And if we don't start treating these on that basis, we're never going to get ahead of this problem.
Mike, final thoughts.
So we have standards to apply. You can't tell anybody anymore, be ready to survive this, have your backups ready. All those messages have just over and over and over and over. Do the right thing, have your backup, be ready, have them off site, right? All that's always been there. The part that is missing is just the government being involved in directly going after these actors, because it is, you can say with a high degree of confidence, they're being supported, in this case, by the Russian government, and that makes this different than a bank robber.
And, God, there's a question in here that is so great, which is, if you had, carte blanche, how would you solve the pipeline issue? I think, we've hit a lot of those things. Like, we need, and somebody says, Mike 2024. Mike is going to... Mike of
they don't let me make public policy anymore, and I think you see why. I want everybody to hang.
Mike on the single issue campaign. Yeah, you know what? I like Mike. Ooh, that's pretty good.
Hi, Michelle.
Yeah. But I mean, we've talked about public policy changes. We've talked about, have backups that you can actually use, be ready for a ransomware attack. Like, it's coming for you. JLP, you keep saying that. And Mike, you say that as well. Your ticket's the next one to get punched. Get ready. So, all right, everybody. Well, thanks for joining us. Don't forget to take that survey. We really appreciate it. We really appreciate you being here and taking the time to join us today. Again, fill out survey, shoot us an email, let us know if you need anything, and have an awesome day.
Yeah, and this was the best chat that I have watched during one of these things. This was really good. I mean, thanks everybody for showing up and being active participants, because that made it.
Yeah. Yep. All right, y'all. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank-
Bye.